Good afternoon and welcome to the last FIA panel for today in Singapore. My name is Casey Lam from Singapore Exchange, and I'm honored to be the moderator for today's panel. SGX is also the proud sponsor for today's panel discussion, the topic entitled UMR Phase 6, Riding the Wave with SGX. Now, this is a very important topic for those affected in the industry, and many are still struggling to understand the full impact of this. Before we start, here's a few housekeeping rules. We have a short 30 minutes panel, and I want to try to give some time for questions at the end, but I need for those questions to come in early so I can prioritize them accordingly. So do send your questions in early. Now, as we pass the deadline for Phase 5 of Uncleared Margin Rules, UMR for short, the industry is now preparing for Phase 6, the final rollout. Meanwhile, Basel's SACCA, or Standard Approach for Credit Counterparty Risk, is undergoing various stages of global rollout, and this will further complicate the collateral management space. To help us understand the full impact of implementation challenges involving UMR, we are fortunate to have the following experts in our panel today. Now we have Mark Knapp. Mark from London. Mark, if you mind waving your hands, that's good, thanks. Mark is the MD and Head of Partnership in Business Development from Cassini System, the provider of OTC collateral and margin analytics software. Next, we have Sam Edwards. Sam, you mind waving your hand? Yep. Sam is from Hong Kong, based in Hong Kong, from State Street, and Sam is the APAC Head of Collateral Management and drives Collateral Plus business for State Street. Last but not least, we have Rob Vives. Rob from Australia. He's a specialist consultant from Hesta Super Fund. Hesta is one of the top few Australian superannuation fund focusing on healthcare and community services. We have a lot of topics and grounds to cover, so without further ado, let's jump straight into this, and let me start by asking Mark. Mark, there are many components involved in the whole ANA regulation UMR implementation. Can you help boil it down for us? What will be the typical work steps involved by firms caught under UMR, and what are the tasks, components, and best practices involved? Mark?
Yeah, thanks, Casey. Final wave of UMR Phase 6. We've been going for many years now, so we've got quite a lot of experience in how we roll these programs out. Specifically, buy side obviously started to come online Phase 4 and then Phase 5, and now specifically Phase 6 very buy side focused. So what you need to do, the first step is, are you in the regulation or not? So step one is calculating what we call your ANA. So it's basically your outstanding notional on all the products that are caught on a UMR. If you're over 8 billion, that means you're in Phase 6, and you have to act to make sure you comply with the regulation. So you run your portfolio through when you're in, and you try to figure out through an analysis, do I apply SIM? Which is the ISTA methodology, or do you use GRID, your standard approach? And what we see in the buy side, that GRID, if you've got a directional portfolio, GRID is actually beneficial to both parties, both sides of the trades. When you've done that, you need to figure out what infrastructure do I need to make sure that I can comply with the regulation. So you know you're in scope, you know what you want to apply, SIM or GRID. You then figure out, do I outsource? Do I go to State Street and say, hey, can you help me out to run this process for me? Do you buy a solution, Cassini, or do you build something yourself? So if you figure that out, you need to make sure that you've got all the agreements in place. So all the counterparties need to be papered up. And if you have that in place, you start reconciling your IM numbers, and you make sure you comply with the local regulation. And then 5, you go live. And when you go live in Phase 6, we see a lot of people monitoring their thresholds. The pre-trade angle starts to become very important because you want to check before you trade if you start to breach these thresholds. And basically, off you go. And remember, under the regulations, there is no netting like there is with VM. So you have to post whatever it is, and you do that on 2 sides. So that's the main steps, Casey, to ensure you start complying with the regulation.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for the high-level roadmap. But obviously, something that will feature greatly in this operations and running this, margining and so on will be collateral management. Now, Sam, with the increased collateral volumes sourced and posted in phase 5 and collaterals tied in margin calls, how do you see this playing out with phase 6? I mean, collateral volume, literally the collateral management can get pretty messy. How do you see this progressing and what are the ways firms can manage this complexity? Sam?
Thanks, Casey. Yeah, look, I guess while phase 6 captures the largest number of firms of all the phases, 700 or 800 potentially, the amount of actual collateral posted isn't going to dramatically rise from day one. Derivatives are only in scope if traded post the deadline, so 1st of September. In addition, a number of firms are going to start with a monitoring approach as they manage within the posting thresholds of 50 million per relationship. But that being said, the complexity will arise with the number of agreements and relationships that need to be established between, well, I guess now and the next 12 months. So this is where we do expect to see pre-trade optimization opportunities, as Mark spoke to, for clients to maintain their trading activities below the level where posting is required. And then depending on the speed at which amounts are increasing, we'd expect a standard phase 6 client to start the account opening process once levels are reaching sort of 20, 25 million. So maybe 40% of the threshold. I'd caveat that each relationship and situation is going to be different. But on the broker side of the transaction, you may find it hard to get momentum with them until you get to a certain level. So for firms on the buy side that have a significant number of exposures to manage, we generally expect to, well, we are seeing more of an outsourcing approach than we did in phase 5. It helps to take advantage of STP processes and technology, reduces the challenges from calculation, dispute management, collateral selection and settlement. And beyond that, where firms have numbers of relationships to manage, tri-party becomes a factor, probably less so for phase 6 than we've seen in previous phases, where a number of the relationships will be smaller, or the number of relationships that a firm will be managing will be smaller, but it still will be relevant for those who have multiple exposures. You get to benefit from the simplicity and enhanced cross-account optimization, the reduction in operational risk, the speed of asset mobility in tri-party, and you're less reliant on external market settlements. And that, I think, actually is something that in APAC could be particularly useful.
Sam, that sounds pretty complicated as well. Requires a lot of hands-on, work involved by the firms, and I think it's a pretty sound advice. But from the standpoint of end user, let me ask Rob. In terms of implementation, I mean, we have seen clients actually looking at various models, the various IM models, same agreed combo. Relating to this, with a wide regulatory implementation differences across, not just globally, just within Asia Pac alone. Would these different approaches be a problem? And also, we hear from Sam earlier about the challenges involving papering, in the with this rollout. How different do you think this will play out in the final phase, which is coming as soon as next year? Rob?
Casey, that's a really good point. And to draw on both what Sam and Mark have noted, Sam said potentially 700 counterparties are joining the UMR rules, and that is orders of magnitude more than has joined so far. So right there, you've got a large number of people in a short amount of space with finite resources. Mark notes as well that SIM versus grid isn't as cut and dried as it would be for a large bank. You have relatively flat books, therefore SIM optimizes and maximizes that netting opportunity. The challenge that phase 6 firms have is how do they get the right solution in place, and how do they deal with things like asymmetric CSAs, i.e. the sell side bank uses SIM, but you may find grid is best for you. So how does that work for matching? How does that work operationally? So the challenges really there are very much operational in nature. The last and the big point in this one, and the use of SIM in particular, is once a book gets to a certain size, and I know Mark provides a service there to help firms estimate the size of using SIM. At that point, local regulators, Australian, Singapore, or Hong Kong, etc., all have a very high standard that Phase 6 firms need to reach to be able to use SIM. This includes model governance, forms of back testing, model validation, and being able to perform a quantitative market risk-like function that isn't necessarily a native function that already exists within a buy-side firm. So the barrier to use SIM is quite high, and so drawing out that exponential piece of what's cheap, how's it going to work, and what is operationally efficient really is probably one of the great challenges that exists in Phase 6 and Phase 5 that didn't necessarily exist in Phase 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Oh, that's a good point, Rob. And then obviously, along with the implementation of Phase 5 and now Phase 6, there is this SECA implementation I mentioned earlier that's imposed on all OTC derivatives, impacting risk-weighted assets and also leverage ratio in different ways. FX futures, for example, is based on a one-day margin period risk versus cleared 5-day and then uncleared 10-day margin period risk. Whether it's house or client, there's a different ratio as well that's impacted. Now, Mark, from your work in Cassini and with clients, how can clients take a holistic view with all this, instruments and versus trading of listed FX under UMR? What tools and how can traders easily understand the implication of executing a trade in terms of margin calculations? Huh?
Yeah, you're spot on there, Casey. It's obviously you've got the different modules. So as a front office user, being a portfolio manager or an execution desk, you really need to start figuring out, depending on the risk you want to trade, what product am I going to use? Because the impact of margin is quite significant. So very simple example is if I do an FX future versus an FX NDF, so non-deliverable. The non-deliverables contribute towards your ANA, and FX future doesn't. So potentially by running an optimization to see if you can switch out certain trades into the cleared world, you might be able to compress your ANA and stay out of UMR in the first place. Now, granted, if that doesn't work and you are in scope, you need to just figure out what trade can I put onto my book on a portfolio level to make sure that the margin requirement is as low as possible. If you look at Phase 4, Phase 5 firms in the buy side, they have massive increases in IM. And, you have people that used to have a couple of million. We see firms now going well over billions, some even over 2 or 3 billions in collateral that's tied up to satisfy initial margin calls. I mean, it's an increase anyway because it didn't used to exist. You didn't have IM on OTC trading. Then obviously the cleared world, the clearing kicked in. So you post IM or collateral, which is CCP. Now with UMR, you have to post collateral. So the carry cost of a trade is something you need to determine before you trade it. And if you then specifically also take into account the thresholds you have. I mean, Sam mentioned 50 million, but it could be way lower than 50 million, depending on what you agree with your counterparts and the amount of legal entities you have in your counterpart. So you really need to figure out at pre-trade, A, do I breach? B, what product do I pick? So as you say, Casey, it's 1 day versus 5 day versus 10-day risk calculation for margin makes a big difference. So calculate it at pre-trade, ideally in your OMS world, so it just pops up and says this is the best trade for you to do, is ideal. Then there is another bit of regulation where people need to comply with, and it's been there for a while, it's MiFID II, and it talks about best X. So a lot of people just pick the cheapest execution price, thinking that it's best X, but I don't have the cost overview. So you need to get that combination to really get into the best X world. And that's what tools like Cassini do. They help with figuring out all these costs before you trade, and say, just trade an FX future and don't go into the FX and the Fs in this scenario.
Right. Thanks, Mark. I think it sort of changes the whole definition of best execution. I mean, best execution is not just speed, price, but also the cost of how you optimize your trade, right? That is pretty significant. And Sam, I'd like to hear your thoughts on what you're seeing as industry issues around collateral management. This is a big question, right? I mean, it's quite a lot to cover here. In the last phase of UMR rollout, also, can you comment on local collateral as eligible collateral, obviously under different regulations and rules, UMR and the operational challenges in terms of cross-border exchange of securities and efficient settlement of collaterals? Sam?
Sure, thanks, Casey. Yeah, I guess there are a few bits in there, so I'll try and sort of break it out and go one at a time. So I guess if we look at sort of issues from the last rollout and going into the last rollout, then so how do we perform going into September this year? Well, I guess the outcome was we were effectively compliant, so great. But I think it is really important to note that there were significant challenges for all participants in that, be it clients, counterparts on both sides, collateral service providers, custodians. There was a lot to do in the run up to September 1st. And implementation can be a challenge, both from an onboarding and an implementation setup perspective, as well as from a data cleansing perspective, if you're a firm that hasn't necessarily had to do that from a trade files or provision before. So for the previous phases, we've been working with firms that have, in one shape or form, had some experience of collateral management, trade management, or onboarding. For a significant portion of phase 6, this is going to be new territory. So I would say, and my main point today probably is it's essential to kick this off in good time and get started with the process soon. For our clients at State Street, we're asking them to determine what services they will require from us within the next 2 months. It may be that go live isn't until 1st of September, but there are significant challenges in terms of sort of onboarding as we've talked to. The change in client type is also leading to a change in approach, as we've sort of discussed, be it partial or full outsourcing, being appropriate for different firms with different experience, appetite, or even sort of investment capability to build it themselves. So I guess we're advocating that firms look to solutions that use market utilities, market standard approaches. So for example, rather than building your own CRIF file or sim grid calc, look to someone like Cassini Direct, or to a collateral management solution that utilizes Cassini, for example. In the same way at State Street with Collateral Plus, we're accessing into Acadia for margin and dispute management. We feel that the more people can take these standard approaches, the easier it's going to be. But
so Sam, just a follow-on question on that.
Yeah.
What do you think is the lead time just to get ready for phase 6? When should I start the latest?
I mean, as I said, we're asking our clients to decide in the next 2 months. It would, across the industry, I would say 4 to 6 months is the expected sort of time from start of conversation to implementation. So these are not easy things to implement, and that I think is the key point, Casey. And there are a number of ways of solving for it. So depending on the type of firm you are, what your future trading expectations are, clients take a real variety of approaches to sort of compliance here. We're from a collateral service provider perspective very happy to help, and provide whatever the relevant service is in sort of a modular fashion. But we also find that clients really benefit from using consultants with experience in the field. It helps them guide them through the process, put together solutions that are, bespoke and specific, or work for them, let's say, rather than bespoke. So, yeah, I would say, I'd reiterate it, time's running out if you haven't sort of decided what you're doing yet. And we are seeing some collateral service providers already, turn away clients that they don't already have existing relationships with. So
right.
Let me touch on the collateral eligibility part of the question that you had there, Casey. So, and Rob touched on it. So where you have cross-jurisdictional relationships, each pairing is going to be different. In general, a simple principle is that most conservatives are going to apply. But as he mentioned, it's possible that you're going to have these asymmetrical collateral schedules. In practice, we see, the majority as being the same on both sides, but that all comes down to both a negotiation process and an implementation process. So, from a practical perspective, the type of collateral we're seeing posted is pretty narrow, and we do see that sort of evolving as we move from this sort of implementation compliance phase into how do we optimize what we're doing. And ultimately, I think that's one of the good things that comes out of UMR is it enables the buy side to really sort of get a better grip on inventory, collateral management, all of the elements that they put within a treasury function to really enable them to have more control of their financial resources and generate returns out of it. The last one I think you were touched on there was sort of the cross-jurisdictional, the time zone sort of aspects. So, there definitely can be challenges if you're a firm that is APAC based but trading across multiple regions, and from our perspective, having a new platform, Collateral Plus, on a new technology stack, enabling us to deliver sort of on-demand services, ease of integration, it can be really important. So that's definitely an aspect that we see firms having, some of them a challenge with. If you're getting your information late in the day, you can potentially be reliant on batch processes that lead to even further delays in knowing or being able to predict your cash collateral positions for the day. So at that point, having on-demand calc or a global margin management service can be really important. I think, for Australia, so look, Rob, maybe I'll go direct to you. I'm sure you see some challenges in this space. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, Sam. And one of the really fun things that we need to do down in this end of the world is we effectively close our book almost before New York opens. So, when New York opens, there's generally a stack of transactions that gets done. But then we're 8 hours before the foreign exchange is snapped at that sell side bank. And at that point, it could be a material difference because the Fed did something than the way where the book was snapped in Australia. So that timing and the collateral management falls back on an operational process for your margin and model governance and how you build those tolerances in, and then convincing the regulator that those tolerances are sensible, because practical compliance is about being functionally and operationally sensible at the same time. It's a really good point.
So how do you deal with that, Rob? Just out of curiosity, because you get an external fund manager, they're US based, East Coast is probably easier, the West Coast, but you need to get those numbers in because our process it's T+1. How do you deal with that?
So what we're needing to do, and I think this probably leads into the next question with KC there around data. And data is key. There's no simple way about it. And at some point in time, we as a buy-side firm here in Australia have looked to say, well, to meet the APRA requirement, we need to actually take a transaction feed that may not have been fully allocated, fully confirmed, or fully matched. And working with our regulator to say that we have got the best data we have available at the timeliness we need to be able to reach that point. Now, come T2, we will refresh that. And if there needs to be a change at that point, we will. But as soon as technologically practicable means sometimes that feed might be a bit further upstream than we'd otherwise ideally want.
That's good. I think I think the two questions were posted on the chat. Both Rob and I think early on Sam did answer. So I'm gonna basically do a one final thought part where I'm gonna get both Mark, Sam, and Rob to provide a one final thought on how we can advise, what best advice we can give to participants who are looking at Phase 6 implementation, and then we'll just do a wrap up because we're almost running out of time. So we'll start with Mark. Mark, is there something you can share on this?
Yeah, I think Sam and Rob both said it already, is don't wait, but I think people have been hearing that for about 7 years now. I think specifically for Phase 6, don't underestimate monitoring. I hear firms say all the time, we just monitor it, I have it under control. You really need to do that in a very tight fashion. And we also see it quite quickly change and run up. And then if you haven't papered, you literally get a block on trading. And we've seen it in phase 5 firms where they can't trade in specific funds for 4 to 6 weeks. So don't get exposed. Make sure you get monitoring in place. It's important, but you got to do it on a daily basis and check before you trade if you're breaching. That will be my key message. Don't underestimate the monitoring, because that's what people all say. Phase 6 is easy. We just monitor it and we'll be fine. We stay under. Not that easy.
Right. Okay. Over to you, Sam. What are your final thoughts?
Thanks, Casey. I mean, I think, you know, we've said the timing is key. I think that's definitely it. For me, it's an opportunity for the buy side to progress their collateral and inventory management sort of capabilities, look for new funding solutions, you know, and really sort of, I would say, while compliance has got to be, you know, the obvious focus, don't lose sight of, from a strategic perspective, where you want to get to in terms of your inventory management capabilities and sort of the things that are coming down the future in terms of, you know, be it peer-to-peer options, digital options. There's, you know, there's lots of other things coming that I think are going to really enable the buy side to take more control of their financial resources.
Thanks, Sam. Rob?
Backing up on sort of Mark and Sam there, I think that one of the things that firms need to do is utilising uncleared margin rules as a way to effectively bring control in a little bit. It's really tempting as a buy-side firm to say, oh, the manager's got it, and off you go on your merry way. This, almost via regulators, is forcing that internalisation. And at that point, you can say, well, which form of ISDA agreements do I have in place? If I've got 7 managers with 7 ISDA agreements, that's 7 netting sets. And I have to spread my threshold across 7 different managers. That means that I may be posting, whereas with a single ISDA against 1 or 2 principal liquidity providers, I get to utilise my full USD 50. So my commentary at this forum would be, compliance is key, but actually look to manage your compliance. Don't actually assume you have to bucket the whole thing and paint the town red and, you know, really go for it. Think about how you can get a minimum viable product of compliance, but at the same time, make your efficiencies where you can and use the interest and the energy and the project spend that's available to uplift collateral and uplift that pre-trade analytic piece as well.
Well, thanks, Rob. This is actually very useful. I think on that note, we would like to end our panel discussion today. We have covered many grounds, from collateral to, you know, implementation to, you know, compliance, risk management, and all sorts. It took a lot of people, different people, to put this panel together. And then as a sponsor for this panel, I'd like to thank our speakers for today. Mark for waking up early, or staying up late rather. Audience, our host at FIA, a tech support team for making this panel a success. Thank you very much, guys. Thanks. Bye.